Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of our physical health series. When we were deciding what to put into this series, one of the concepts that came up the most was just this idea of general well-being. So how do we keep the body functioning optimally when we're doing things like training, performing, traveling, using the body a lot? Okay, how do we stay functioning well? How do we maintain our longevity while doing that? Start this off, we need to understand the concept of homeostasis. And this is our body's state of balance, okay, of internal physical and chemical balance. When we're in a good state of homeostasis, that is when we are functioning optimally. Stresses are anything that disrupt this balance. Okay, and this is a huge category and can include anything from illness, injury, environment and temperature, psychological or emotional stress, nutrient availability, lack of sleep, and exercise. So now we don't want to be afraid of stress. We need stress to get better as athletes. Our bodies are awesome and they can adapt to the stresses placed on them, provided that we facilitate and allow for adequate recovery. If overall stresses get too high, and we aren't able to facilitate recovery, that's when we lose the ability to adapt to stress and we get out of this state of balance. We stop functioning optimally. This can manifest as physical performance deficits, staying sore or tight longer than usual, GI issues, low libido, decreased immune system function, change in body composition, and also a lack of sleep or poor sleep. And that in turn leads to things like fogginess, short temper, forgetfulness, and difficulty concentrating. So now when we talk about general well-being, we're talking about ways and we're looking at ways to best facilitate recovery from the stresses that we know we're going to incur, whether from training, performing, traveling, anything in that category, but then also to mitigate other stresses in our lives from things outside of our practice that we may be able to have a little bit more control over. So that's what we're getting into in this episode. We're talking about strategies to facilitate recovery and minimize other stress where we can. This is a very big list. There's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today. And I really don't want you to feel overwhelmed and to think that you need to implement all of these strategies to have some benefit. That is not the case. We're talking about overall stress load here. So even if we're able to decrease one aspect of stress in our lives, that decreases the overall load, and that can be super beneficial. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. All right, and then quickly before we get into it, just a disclaimer, this is not medical advice. This is just information. All right, let's go. Okay, so first topic we're going to cover today is sleep. Do not glorify the grind, okay? I don't care how many prehab exercises we do. I don't care what supplements we're taking. If we aren't getting good sleep, all right, good quality sleep, and good enough duration, long enough duration, we're really doing the body a disservice. We need about, like the average person needs about 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep a night. And what does good quality mean? That means that we have adequate time to go through our stages of light and deep sleep. Why does sleep matter? Okay, what's the big deal about this? During deep sleep, and this is one of many reasons, but during deep sleep is when we release something called growth hormone. Growth hormone is what stimulates recovery in our body. It facilitates muscle repair and muscle growth. So if we don't get enough deep sleep in a given night, or also over multiple nights, this can become like a chronic thing. Growth hormone secretion diminishes and we're not able to facilitate recovery and repair in our bodies. So this is that adaptation that we were talking about. We're not able to facilitate that. And this ultimately leads to decreased performance like physical performance. And then this also leads to an increase in what we call rating of perceived exertion. So how hard that we find a given exercise to be for a given task. So one day that we had good sleep, you ran a mile, and on a 0 to 10 scale, that was about a 5. I felt it was, difficult, but not too difficult. When we have a bad night's sleep, or if we have chronically bad sleep, that rating of perceived exertion for a given task goes up. So that might be, instead of a 5, that could be a 6, 7, or 8. Without adequate sleep, our psychomotor function decreases. This is our hand-eye coordination. This is our agility, our decision-making with movement, and this is not something that we want to decrease. And lastly, okay, due to our processes of hormone secretion during sleep, so not just growth hormone like we talked about, but there's also lots of other ones. If we have sleep deprivation, or even just a chronically non-existent sleep schedule, so we're going to bed and we're getting up at different times always, okay, or for a given period of time, this can lead to more chronic health issues because it disrupts that regular schedule of hormone secretion. So this can lead to health issues such as increasing our risk for cardiovascular disease, also certain cancers, and thyroid dysfunction. So now that we know that sleep's important and why it's important, how do we get good sleep? So in the show notes, we're attaching a infographic that has lots and lots of different strategies. But to sum it all up for the sake of time, we need to make sure that we are creating a comfortable environment for sleep. All right, level of light, temperature, making sure body and mind are relaxed. We need to set a routine. This is really important. All right, our internal clock will help us get better sleep. If we go to sleep at the same time and try to get up at the same time every day, we're setting ourselves up for much better sleep quality than if that varies. All right, I know that's not always the easiest thing to do, but at least creating a routine around sleep can be very beneficial. And then lastly, there are some nutritional interventions that we can try to help with sleep. So specifically avoiding things like caffeine after 2 or 3 p.m., alcohol and nicotine, avoiding eating big meals before we go to sleep, and then also considering what we're eating and drinking closer to sleep time so that we're not disrupting our sleep, either with waking up to go to the bathroom or with our body having to digest heavier foods while we're sleeping. Okie dokie. So next up is nutrition. And I know this is a huge topic. It is a very loaded topic. And so what I want to be really clear about here is that we are talking about nutrition for performance. I'm not talking about nutrition for weight gain or weight loss. I'm not talking about nutrition for disease management. I'm talking about specifically what we know about nutrition for fueling athletic performance. Okay, so let's start with that. Fueling. We need to make sure that we're getting adequate calories in for the work that we're doing, for whatever it is, whether it's training, whether it's performance. We need to be eating enough. Okay, if we're not eating enough, if we're not fueling enough, we end up in a fasted state. So that means 2 things. First off, that fasted state is a state of stress. Okay, this whole episode is about mitigating those extra stresses on the body. And being in a fasted state, especially while we're training, especially while we're performing, is an extra stress. Second thing, okay, if we don't have adequate fuel, our body's going to find it from somewhere, okay? If we're not feeding it, if we're not giving it to our body, it's got to get it from somewhere. We still have to do the thing. So it's going to break down our fats. And this is fine. It's a good source of energy. That's why our body holds on to fat, but it's an inefficient process to create energy. So we won't be able to do as much if we're using fats as our main fuel source. And then it's also going to break down our muscles. Our body can also turn protein into energy, which is super cool. But it's going to get it from our muscles. And then it's also going to use that protein for like regular body processes. But then we're not going to have protein to recover afterwards. Okay, we're not going to be able to build that back up. So we want to provide fuel for our body, for our body. We want to provide fuel for our body, for performance, for rehearsals, for training. Okay, so a big part of this is making sure that we're not working out fasted. And then what's also important is to fuel the body after, again, whatever it is, whatever our exercise session is, training, performance, it all counts. If you're moving, we got to be fueling. Okay, I don't want to put into, I'm not going to sit here and spout off just like straight up numbers for 10 minutes about exactly how many carbohydrates we want to get, exactly how much protein we want to get. I'm going to include charts in the show notes about that, as well as some examples of, okay, I need to get like whatever, 65 grams of protein. That's really low. Sorry, carbs, low for carbs. Honestly, low for protein too. But how does that look on a plate? If I need to get this much of calories, carbs, proteins, fats in a day, how do I do that? We're going to include some notes at the bottom. I don't want to sit here talking about numbers. So we need to fuel beforehand. We're going to talk about, I'm going to put links as to how much we need to eat beforehand. We also need to recover. So we need to fuel afterwards. What's important with both of these, before and after, is that we're including not just carbohydrate, but we're including carbohydrate and protein. Okay. Carb provides fuel for exercise. Carb is glucose. It is our body's main energy source. It's its preferred energy source, like its most efficient energy source. So giving the body carbohydrate spares it using up our protein to do that instead. Eating protein along with that carb then gives the body something to recover with, something to rebuild the muscle with at the end of our bout of exercise. Again, whatever that happens to be, training, performance, teaching even. Okay, so it's important that we get adequate fuel beforehand with a carb and protein, and adequate fuel afterwards with a carb and protein. And again, I'm going to put examples of this, but I want it to be clear that we need both. Both is important, and it's needed before and after. If we have long bouts of exercise, okay, I'm talking here lasting more than 2 hours, it's also important that we try and include some snacks. All right, have some snacks available. And for these, something easily digestible. So I'd want to worry a little bit less about the exact macronutrient breakdown. Okay, here, if we're not getting as much protein, that's totally fine. But something to give the body fuel so that we're not ending up in that fasted state, that higher stress state, and we're able to perform better. So this could be something, let's say, quick eats. So sipping on a fruit smoothie is good. Granola bars are great if we have a little bit more time to like sit and have a little snack. Pita or pretzels with hummus or another kind of dip, all good options. Okay, the point is that we are fueling throughout. If we're lasting more than 2 hours, if there's a chance that we can deplete our body's stores of energy so that we're sparing muscle, we're sparing our fats. So we've talked about it. We need both carbs. We need both carbs and protein for what we're doing. Again, I'm going to talk about numbers in the show notes. I don't want to sit here and just yell numbers at you because that's going to get really boring really fast. But quickly, let's talk about fats. And same like carbs and protein, I don't want us limiting any single macronutrient group. We don't need to be afraid of any of them. Our body has evolved to use all of them. In general, we try to say that athletes should be discouraged from having a fat intake below 20% of their overall energy intake. This is usually accompanied by like a decreased variety in our diet. And so not only are we going to have an inadequate fat intake, but generally we can also end up with certain micronutrient deficiencies, especially our fat soluble vitamins, so vitamins A, E, D, and K, and our essential fatty acids. Fat contributes to our feelings of staying full. And again, it can also help fuel our exercise. So don't be afraid of them. Do not cut them out. They're important. But obviously eaten in moderation. When we eat a variety of food, so trying to get colorful foods, a variety of meats and plant-based protein sources as well, we can ensure pretty much adequate macro and micronutrient intake. So our macronutrients, like we talked about, are carbs, fats, and proteins, and our micronutrients, which don't provide us with energy, but are still super important, are vitamins and minerals. If you are a picky eater and you don't like to eat a variety of food, that's totally okay. That's not a big deal, but take a multivitamin. All right. Find one that works for you, that you feel safe putting in your body, that works for your budget as well. But something is going to be better than nothing. And as well, another supplement, if we don't have a very varied diet, is an omega-3 supplement. Okay, this is an essential fatty acid. It's really important for our body's functioning. It's important for performance and can be hard to get if we have a limited diet. In the case that we are traveling or we don't have a lot of time, there are a lot of, as much as we, try to eat whole foods, we try to limit our fast food intake, sometimes there isn't really an option around it. Okay, if we're stuck in a hotel room, if we've been on the road. So let's talk real quick here about a few options for how we can make good food choices while we don't necessarily have access to a lot of food options. So choosing fast food like burritos, or basically any restaurant that serves stuff, like a fast food restaurant that serves something in a bowl, like poke, or I don't know about in the States or other places, something like Freshie that does salad bowls. Generally, those we can get a really good variety of food. Okay, so we'll have different plant-based sources of protein as well as carbohydrate. We can get a good variety of vegetables, and there are lots of different protein options. So these are great for getting all our macronutrients as well as a variety of micronutrients. Another option is smoothies. Going to a smoothie bar, because again, we can get a solid amount of variety. We can get vegetables in there. If you find that they're too sweet, you can ask to swap out juice as a mix for water. If we find that we need a little bit more protein, most smoothie bars offer you can add in a scoop of protein to your smoothie. You can also swap, again, if there's mixing with juice, ask to swap it with milk or a milk substitute that's going to give us a bit more protein into that smoothie. Also, and this works also if we don't have like as much of an appetite, or we find that it's harder to take in food around training, getting a meal replacement shake, whether you decide to make one on your own as like a protein shake, or you choose to purchase one, again, something that you feel safe putting in your body and fits your budget, but something that will give us adequate carbs, adequate protein, and some fats. All right, we are looking just to get that energy in and get those macronutrients in. So do not be shy if we don't have other options around us, or we're in a bind, or we don't have a good, we don't have much of an appetite for whatever reason. Meal replacement drinks are a good option in this case. So next up, going along with nutrition, is hydration. So dehydration is a stressor that we can often forget about, but ultimately when we're dehydrated, we're depleting the body of something that it needs to function, being water in this case, okay, and that puts the body into a state of stress. Dehydration can lead to fatigue, it can lead to headache, it can lead to fogginess, and also just overall decreased athletic performance. Sort of same like nutrition, we want to make sure that we start exercise hydrated, Okay. If our exercise is lasting longer than 2 hours, it's important to make sure that we have something to sip on throughout our exercise. Okay. And whether that exercise for you is training, whether it's performance or whether it's teaching that day, doesn't matter. Movement, it all counts. All right. And that we rehydrate at the end of exercise, especially if we know that we're a bit of a sweaty person. When we sweat, we're not losing just water, we're also losing electrolytes. Okay, specifically, not necessarily specifically, but especially sodium and potassium. There's a couple ways that we can replenish these guys. All right, and we can do that through our dietary intake. So making sure that we're salting our food in our recovery meal or snack, whatever. Or we can do this through a sports drink. So whether you choose to use a commercial sports drink, those are super convenient. Some may have additives, added color, and they may be high in sugar, but go with what suits you and what you feel safe putting in your body, what suits your taste buds, and also what suits your budget. Instead of a commercial sports drink, we also have the option to create our own. So we can add in a 1/4 teaspoon of salt into a liter of water. We can also add into that like a squeeze of lemon juice or some maple syrup or some honey to help add to the nutrition of it. And then ultimately, when it comes to hydration, use your pee as a guide. Okay, we want our pee to be a nice pale yellow color. If we're like, we're dark yellow, we're brown, we're dehydrated. Okay, go drink some water now, please. Preferably with some salt or something in it so that we're not only adding water, but we are also replenishing electrolytes in our body. And on the other hand, if our pee is clear, that means we are hyperhydrated. Okay, so we need to don't drink some water for an hour or so. Make sure that we're taking in some electrolytes to help balance that water content out. Okay, so next up, we're talking about emotional and psychological stress. Now, I don't want to get into this a ton here in this series. We do have the mental health series on CircusTalk, which will be able to go into this a lot more in depth and give you a lot more tools for managing emotional stress and overall mental health. But we do need to acknowledge it here when we're talking about general well-being. Like we've been talking about in this episode so far, this is about managing different stressors in our lives and allowing the body to recover from that stress. Emotional stress impacts the body in very much the same way as physical stress or environmental stressors do by increasing circulation of a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol puts our body into what we call a sympathetic dominant state. Okay, this is our fight or flight state. And our bodies don't recover when we're in that sympathetic dominant state. It is harder for them to take the time to get back to our state of homeostasis. When we want to recover, we need to be in a more parasympathetic dominant state. This is our rest and digest state. Even, if we take times for cool downs and we're eating properly and we're sleeping properly, if we have high amounts of emotional stress, we're still going to have that high amount of cortisol, and we're going to be in that more sympathetic dominant state. It's going to be harder for the body to recover, to come back to our state of homeostasis overall. Okay, so that's all I really want to say about it here. I'm going to link in our notes to one of my favorite tools to use to manage emotional stress. Maybe that'll be something that'll be helpful to you, but check out that mental health series. It's going to be able to go a lot more in depth on this. And I just want to take the time here to acknowledge that it is not just physical stressors that we need to pay attention to when we're talking about general well-being, but emotional stressors can have a huge impact as well. And we need to give them attention too. Next up, and in this last part of the episode, we're going to talk about training itself and things that we can do within our training to mitigate the amount of stress that training itself is putting on the body. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is warm-ups, and we're going to talk sort of briefly here, but I'm including in the show notes a bit more of a detailed chart of what exactly we want in a warm-up. But what's most important here is that we do warm up. We take the time to get our body ready for activity. We create heat in the body. We get the blood flowing. We get the joints ready to go. And we prep our muscles to be able to do the thing we want. We're not just flying right into it. Okay. In a warm up, and again, we'll give this in a bit more detail. Step one, we want to create heat. We want to do some cardio. All right, get the blood flowing. This also increases our joint viscosity, so it decreases joint stiffness. After that, we want to do some specific muscle prep and activation. So getting the muscles ready to go that we're going to be using for our specific skills. So we're doing a bunch of jumps that day, getting ready with some glute bridges, some squats, getting the muscles we're going to use awake and ready to go. And this is also a really beautiful time to add in some of like your prehab and maintenance exercises. After that, this is a good spot to add in your dynamic stretching or active static stretching. This loosens the muscles that we need and gets us ready to go into the ranges that we need for our skills. So people are getting really afraid of static stretching. It is not something to be afraid of. If we're going to be pulling our splits in our training, stretch your splits before your training. That's okay. I say active static stretching here, meaning that we are holding ourselves in those positions. We don't relax into those positions. If we do choose to do passive static stretching in our warm-up, so holding a split, holding a middle split, whatever position you're doing, we could do it passively. We can relax into the position, but to mitigate the amount of decreased muscle activation that we can get from those, decrease the amount of impact it has on our proprioception, adding in some ballistic movements afterwards. So adding in some jumps, some skipping, hopping, that kind of thing. Very soon after that static stretching, passive static stretching can help mitigate that. And then at the end of our warm-up, that's when we start doing our specific skills, going from basic to more advanced, okay? We're not only warming up the muscles here, but we're also warming up the nervous system, getting it ready for what it's about to do, taking it through the motions. Next up is load management. So this we're really going to talk about a lot more in episode 3, so I'm not going to get into it much here, but making sure that we are paying attention to how much of a specific skill we're doing so that we're not being so repetitive on the body. Okay. Especially if we're doing things like jumps or landings, anything with impact, we are paying attention and being really aware of how much we are doing so that we don't end up doing too much and we let the body recover from it and we're purposeful in our training. So again, I'm going to get a lot more into load management in episode 3 when we talk about chronic injury, but I need to mention it here that it is a big part of how we can mitigate the stress of training. Conditioning is another really important aspect to this. So making sure that, yes, we use our conditioning for strength gains, but we're also using it to maintain balance in the body. So say I am a hand balancer and I've just done a session where all I've done this whole time is push, push, push. I'm adding into my conditioning set some pulling. So I'm not getting an imbalance between my pushing and pulling muscles of my body, but I'm keeping it even. Same deal if I'm training silks and I'm climbing the whole time, I'm adding a bunch of pushing exercises into my conditioning to even out those muscles. If, let's say, I'm training an act where I'm dominant in one arm, your conditioning is the perfect time to make sure that we are giving the other arm some love and staying strong in that other arm. Okay, doing single arm exercises on that non-dominant side so that we don't get an imbalance, which can lead to an increased risk of both chronic and acute injury. Lastly, here is our cool downs. So cool downs are a really important and sometimes overlooked aspect of training. But sort of how we've spoken about, we need to get into a state of recovery. We want to promote recovery in our body. During training, during exercise, whatever kind of exercise it is, we get into what we call a sympathetic dominant state, this is our fight or flight state. Okay. Our body is like ready to go. To recover, we want to be in a parasympathetic dominant state. This is our rest and digest. This is where our body allows itself to recover. If we don't get into a parasympathetic dominant state, then we're not going to recover as well as we can. So using a cool down at the end of class or at the end of whatever you're doing, I know how many times have we like done our conditioning set, ran out of class, finished an event, took your stuff down, got out of there, but not taking the time to let the body come into that parasympathetic state. So we can do this with some breath work, just a few minutes of deep belly breathing. And we could also do this with some light passive stretching, okay? Less with the intention here of flexibility gains, but more so with the intention of relaxation for the body. So I know that was a ton of info. We went through so much in this episode. So let's take a second here to recap it. When we talk about general well-being, we're talking about managing and mitigating our stressors, okay? And this is not just stress from training, but this is stress in all aspects of our lives. Okay, we can mitigate these stresses through adequate sleep and good sleep hygiene, proper nutrition, okay, adequate macronutrient and micronutrient intake, proper hydration, and as well management of our emotional stress. During training, there are also certain things we can do to decrease the stresses of training on our body. So using a warm-up to prepare the body for training, managing the amount that we're doing so that we're not overloading, properly cooling down to help our body get into a parasympathetic, that rest and digest state so that we can recover properly. And then also using conditioning as a means of maintaining balance in the body. So not just working on specifically what we need for our sport. If we do a lot of pulling, if we do a lot of handstands, a lot of pushing, but using it as a means of training the opposite so that we don't get big imbalances in our body, which will increase our risk for injury. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any questions, please don't be shy to comment here or send me a message either on Instagram. I'm bendon'tbreak.at, or you can email me at bendon'tbreak.at@gmail.com. You could also find me on Facebook under the same name, or check out my website, bendon'tbreak.net. Thank you guys.